It's time for us to check back in with Granny Hite and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. The Gaffing of Clitch Tidnanny. Levesey Vasey hugged to her bosom the completed tangled garter quilt. That people should do such fine things for her. That she should need a marriage quilt at all. The very thought overwhelmed her, made her redden up like a burning bush. The prospect of having a man in her little cottage, not just once for a peculiar breakfast, but for 3 meals a day until time's end. Ever since her 20th birthday, she'd given up making quilts and household fixings, except for her younger sisters. Had in fact given away most of the pile of bed covers that she'd started when she was 12. A born and meant old maid she'd resigned herself to be. And then that night in the swamp. "Tell us about it, Levesey," rightfully demanded the girls. "No," shouted Levesey. "Then give back the quilt." "No," shrieked Levesey. "Hark back or hand back." Outside, a little tree frog creaked in the spring sun. "Oh!" At the sound, Levesey shivered. They put the quilt around her. "Since you're so cold—" "I'm not cold," but she kept the puff about her. She had no mind to let it go. One of these other promised brides would get it over her dead body. "You might as well tell us, Levesey," the girls warned, "or we'll dig it out of Clinch." "Don't you dare ask Clinch." But that threat did it. Oh dear. Well, it came about like this. On an evening of spring this year, Levesey Vasey had left her cottage and gone for a bird walk. It led her farther than usual. It led past cornfields and meadows and through the 4-mile woodland where Cat Track Run spraddles out into Slackwater back of Big Piney River. A lone dweller and long baffled by her fate, Levesey often turned to a good view of sunsets, cloud piles, mountain tops, and stars for a lift of the heart. Here in open ground, close to the marsh, she had them all in one sweep. The hour of dusk was soft, the neck of her cotton dress was low and airy, the breeze on her past girlish cheek, for she was 25, was pleasant. It drove away mosquitoes. She sank into a coarse weed bed under a swamp maple and gave herself to seething and rebelling at her mateless lot. She discovered that she was not by herself in this wild spot. The man who approached her hidden nest was lifting feet with a squish from the blue mud, and they came up big as kegs. He was looking for the maker of a throaty run of notes that sounded on the evening air like sleigh bells. Levesey's eyes narrowed. She recognized this man. Clinch Tidnanny knew everything that swam, jumped, waded, or dove in pond water. Tall he was, and homely, and shambly, and the bachelor gear that held his pants up could do with another button. Its lack aroused the maternal instinct in her, but Clinch, besides having once played a couple of childhood tricks on her, was the axe-droppingest, hoe-flingingest, out-lightingest man in the hollow, always in flight from something. From honest chores his sister-in-law Effie always said with scorn. When Clinch lit for the bogs, he was harder to find than a bee on a cold day. His unwary nearing stirred up ancient fires of combat in Levesey. His hunt for the maker of that song brought him spang to the maple. His eyes searched the trunk. She informed from her ambush coolly, "It's a sparrow." He spun, "It's a frog." It's a white-throat sparrow, and if you knew smitch or smidgen about anything higher than your shoe tops, Clinch Tidnanny, you wouldn't have to gawp to see it. It's a frog, Lorraine Vasey, an incy tree frog with his neck swole like a bubble, and you had no call to give me that turn. It's not a frog, and I'm not Lorraine. I'm Levesey, and sit where I please. That's a sparrow. If you're so smart, shake the tree. Clinch grappled and swayed the tree, and startled a bird flew out. "Ha," said Levesey. He swung the tree again, and a frog sprang down, no bigger than a postage stamp, followed by another. "Ha," said Clinch. Their eyes met and hooked. This was when something turned over right inside Levacy with a heave and a bump. "My," said Levacy. "My, you have big hands." He regarded his hands. "My, you're horse-strong, the way you rattled that tree." Something advised Levacy, "This is the way. This is how Lorraine and Effie and all your sisters managed. This is how it is done." Clinch, plainly pleased at shaking out 2 frogs to 1 bird, admitted, "I'm pretty strong, I guess." She laughed softly. "What's funny?" he asked it sharply. "That I should try to contrary you about anything that lives in swamps. I do know what's in these bogs." She leaned back on her arms. She looked up at him. What she saw would do in overflowing measure. Sandy hair, still thick and strong, needed only its back and sides trimmed under a tight-fitting cooking pot. Eyes blue as a wash shirt and wisty, needed the flash that only a woman can light. "When I was a gangly girl," Clinch Tid Nanny, she reminded herself grimly, "you stuck a newt down my neck. I screamed and cried. You rolled on the ground and laughed. I was 11. You were 13. Now I'm... oh, Lordy." She patted the ground. "Sit. In skunk cabbage? I don't see any petunias around here." He sat down cautiously, 3 tree frog jumps away. "Now," she said, "tell me about frogs. You're the skedaddlingest man in 2 counties," she didn't tell him, "but you've lit your last shuck, if I have anything to do with it." "Well," he said, clasping a knee, "first frog out in spring around here is a skinny feller, sometimes pink, sometimes black, got a soft peepee voice. Next along comes the green frog. He's teeny too, yeller throat, sure pumps his little old ribs, sounds like a peckerwood bird a-drummin'. Third out is the regular tree frog. He's what you took for a sparrow. Then you get a leopard frog, a 3-incher, prime bait for bass, purrs when you pour water on his back, squirts when he leaps." "Until you put that mud puppy down my neck," Clinch Tid Nanny, Levacy recalled to herself, "I used to pluck hairs from my head and draw them through my fingers and think of you. They came out curly. That was a wonderful sign. I cut a switch and stuck it in the ground, pointing to your house. It leafed out. That was another sign. Aunt Shiloh said they couldn't fail, but they did." Continued Clinch. "Pickerel frog comes next. He's goldy brown, sings like cloth a-rippin', hardly chunks the water when he takes his header. Then you get the wood frog. He likes it under the Indian lettuce. About blue flag time, the cricket frog shows up, plays dead, floats on water, can jump like a hoppergrass, but can't climb trees. And finally," said Clinch reverently, "you get the bullfrog." "I could make such a useful man of you," Clinch Tid Nanny thought Levacy. She studied his gaunt side face as dark descended. "I'd feed you. I'd make a real home-loving man of you. I'm not bad-looking, plain maybe, but so were most of my sisters, and they all married. My arms are stretched like spring poles from wrastling calves and shoats, but they've cuddled and rocked the little frightened lambs, too. My hair's real nice. It catches and holds the sun like a crib holds corn when it's perked right. I'd fluff my hair out, Clinch. I'd rub cucumber juice on my face and orris root on my elbows." It may have been the stillness. Clinch moved closer. "Old bull, he's a frog. A full-growed, pop-eyed bull's got legs 10 inches long and can jump 8 foot. Hates to hurry, though. Druther sat on a lily pad with his hands pigeoned in and grin. Hands like a man's, but 4-fingered. Can sing underwater. When he's really jug-a-rummin', you can hear him a mile. Tastiest thing there is. Beats terrapin." Clinch's mouth suggested a frog's when a dragonfly passes by. "My, you make me hungry," said Levacy. Me too. Guess I ought to be pushing along back to camp. Wait! He must not be allowed to go, perceived Levesey in sharp alarm. Not yet. Do you look only for frogs when you're out here, Clinch? Don't you ever watch the stars? Why, no, not me. Reckon I'd fall into scum water if I did. I must lift your eyesights, Clinch Tidnanny, thought Levesey, but I must land you first. And to land you, I must keep you here. Night-blooming pond lilies opened, breathing of pineapple and honey. For Levesey, the odor was heavenly. For Clinch, it must have been another reminder of supper. He began to gather his feet for rising. For the second time, Levesey laughed softly. What's funny now? I'm thinking about the time we were children and the game was post office. You were told to give me a letter with 2 stamps on it. Instead, you lit a shuck. I promised Ma I'd be home early. Did you go straight home? No, I went frogging. Guess I was just scared of girls. A curve of silver rose in the gap between Peckerwood Mountain and Trapper Bald. From the woodland in back of Levesey and Clinch crept the night scent of sweet rocket, the jasmine and vanilla of wild tobacco. But I ain't scared now, asserted Clinch, maybe surprising himself. By the thickness of a leaf and of another leaf, the shoulders of the man and woman neared each other. Snails and tendrils moved slowly, too. But they'd get there. The arm of the skedaddlingest man in the hollow stole charily, then with sudden iron grapple about her waist. He's going to speak, thought Levesey, breathless. Glory be, drought's ended. Levesey? Yes, Clinch. Levesey, Bonk! Clinch sat straight up. Never mind, it's only a froggy, Clinch. Froggy nothing, it's a frog! Clinch was on his feet, the bonker kerplunked. Levesey grasped for Clinch, good and riled. Bonk! And from across the pond, a retorting bonk! 2 of them! Clinch started up the slope, legs moving like scissors. Clinch Tidnanny, where are you going? I'm going to make me a jacklight and cut me a frog stick. She stood in the wash of moonlight, mad all over. It would serve him right, she told herself, if she bolted for home and left him to his frogs, which she understood were cold-hearted creatures and clammy. But better sense took hold. She had no idea how to find her way out of this tangle of bog and the blackness of the woods beyond. She had lively fear of what might lurk and prowl, and she'd made up her mind to gaff and capture Bachelor Clinch or forever draw her banners down. She stood fast, not daring to move lest she step off into ooze. She thought of snapping turtles and knew keen alarm. To her relief, Clinch appeared in the distance with a blazing pitch knot. Bonk! It exploded almost under her heels. Clinch came running. Did you hear? He must be the grandpa. Levesey, you do bring a feller luck. No man had told her that before. He handed her the torch. You go in front. When you see Popeyes, stop. Clinch, don't stab one while I'm looking. I'll scream. I'll just fork 'em alive for now. These here are frogs. The huntress in her came to the fore. After all, it was a heritage of these mountains. She bore the jacklight. Bonk came from this side of a finger of water, from that. Levesey, there's a pair of eyes. Hold steady while I kindly slide around behind him. Levesey held the brand firmly. Got him! A 6-incher. Tote him in your skirt, will you, Levesey? Another pair of eyes, and another, peered from the pickerel grass. Clinch circled and pinned both bonkers behind the ears. Into Levesey's skirt they went. She had made a bag of it with one hand while holding the light with the other. The biggest splash of all, with a flip and a kerchunk, sounded out from shore. Bonk! The note was plain derision. That was Grandpa. Did you see his legs? Clinch was all disgust for himself and admiration for the boomer. We've got to nail him for pure. The chase continued and the moon climbed. It climbed to the top of its sky and teetered there. Levacy was mud to her knees, 4 healthy croakers were in her skirt, and the grandpa of all was bounding back and forth in the water, halting now and then to blare. The moon began to drop. With a lunge, Clinch forked Grandpa. "Bust my tugs! He's a 9-incher, Levacy, with legs a foot long." "Clinch, are we done now?" "Sure are. Camp's nigh. You and me, Levacy, are going to have a feast." They started for hard ground. It called for a jump. That was when Levacy froze to an ice block, too shocked to move, too paralyzed even to yell. "Step careful and don't let that skirt sag," directed Clinch. He took her arms and grasped the torch. The most horrible thing was happening to her. Grandpa had leaped far and entered the loose throat of her dress, and she couldn't tell Clinch. She stuffed back the very thought. Some private things a person has to keep to her own bosom, and both her hands, lest she lose the other frogs and Clinch be angry, had to clutch the hems of her skirt. "Levacy, are you cold on such a night?" She wasn't cold. It must be something walking over her grave, she managed to tell him, that made her shudder like that. Heavens to Betsy, what if Grandpa lashed out with a kick? She'd not be able to stand it. She'd screech, drop those hems, and tear off everything. And Clinch, who'd once laughed and laughed when he popped a mud puppy down her neck, would roll again for laughter on the first solid ground they came to, would gasp, "Same old Levacy," and get up and bat against trees, rushing to tell everybody in the hollow. Grandpa, after rest, started crawling again. Her skin and muscles tightened until she thought they would twang. If Clinch would only let go her arm so she could grab, but Clinch didn't let go. He jumped her over the wet places and walked her up the slope to some birches where she had to stand with 4 frogs in her skirt and one that had slid down to just over her quivering hip. He wheeled shavings and blew up a fire. He kept her there to shield his blaze. He reached to his stump and drew forth a can and banged up frying pan, and he reached for a look into her folded skirt. He sagged back on his heels. "Where in thunder's Grandpa?" She couldn't answer. She'd die first. "Gone," pronounced Clinch. "If only. How did he get away? It was you who wouldn't let me stab him." She stood stock still. "Well," said Clinch, "we've still got 4, but I sure did crave to fry Grandpa." She craved to fry Grandpa, too. He went aside to deal with the 4, and that was Levacy's chance. She dove for Grandpa, who felt her coming, and lurched from the shelf of her hip to the small of her back. There isn't an arm in the human race, unless given hours, that can reach down its dress nape to the small of its own back. Clinch returned with 8 peeled and washed frog legs. "We'll eat the first pair boiled. They'd go wonderful with onion and tomato, but I ain't got 'em. All's I've got is salt." They each ate 1 leg boiled. Levacy, hungry, almost enjoyed it. "We'll eat the next pair grilled." They ate them grilled. They ate the 3rd pair baked in a leaf, though Levacy was slowing down. They ate the 4th boiled again, or Clinch did. Levacy dropped hers into the bushes. Clinch sighed. "What a snack! There ain't anything in the world like frog. Never in my life did I get enough frog. It wouldn't be possible to get enough frog, I guess." Levacy could have told him it was possible to get enough frog. He lit his pipe. He sat by the fire, arms about his knees. Levacy sat alongside. Grandpa found the hollow of her back comfortable. He didn't stir. "If he just stays that way," thought Levacy, "if only he doesn't bonk." Clinch puffed gravely. He was thinking hard about something. "You know, Levacy," he got that far once before. The pipe glowed a while and went out. He relit it. "Levacy? All right, so her name was Levacy. Yes, Clinch, but bachelorhood dies hard. Clinch even breathed hard. If I could only be sure, he groaned. Of what, Clinch? To herself, that I'd make you a good wife? But I would, Clinch. I'd fend for you, sew for you, cook for you, dose you in sickness, battle you in health. But of course she couldn't flat out say it. If I could only be sure I and you cotton to the same things. He shook his head, stumped by life's hazards. Oh, don't worry about that, she wanted to cry aloud, Grandpa being so close to her that she was practically beside herself and him in between, maybe sensed her tumult. Anyway, he grew restless. He started to finish the tickly circuit of her being. Well, it's getting late, said Clinch. Moon's sunk. Reckon I better see you home, Levesey, afore folks spy us coming out of the woods at morning. He put his pipe away. Oh, I don't care what they spy, thought Levesey, woe-stricken. Why can't I ever gaff this man the way my sisters managed theirs? At this moment, Grandpa got his head into a tuck of cloth and kicked. At that drive of 12-inch leg into pimpled rib, Levesey jackknifed. She straightened and spun, about to cope. Her back was to Clinch, that much for modesty, and here came Grandpa. What's that? Clinch was pop-eyed himself. Your breakfast, Clinch. I been a-savin' him. You been keepin' him there? Levesey blushed and nodded. Then you do like frogs. They traipsed through the woods gaily, laughing to each other, shouting nonsense, making 100 plans, some of which included what to do with Grandpa. They settled on a sauté with butter, onion, tomatoes, sweet pepper, lemon, bay leaf, and thyme, all to be had at Levesey's house. We'll soon have him simperin' in the pan, gloated Levesey. They broke out into meadow country under Rosian sky. Levesey, is that the morning star? Yes, it is, Clinch. I'd like to know more about stars. That one's real nice and shiny. And the sun? Why, it lights up your head to a regular goldy corn-pone yeller. Hold Grandpa tight, Clinch, retorted Levesey, and keep your mind on him. He's going to be goldy yeller, too, in about 10 minutes. You can keep the quilt, Levesey, said the girls in admiration. What a great story. A great story. I'm glad the girls convinced Levesey to share it with them. I really enjoyed this one. Of course, how could you not with the image of Levesey thinking she was going to be an old maid and she was only 25. Of course, things were different in those days. We know that. But she talks about herself like she's old and her beauty's gone. The roses left her cheeks and all that. And you know that wasn't so. She was only 25 years old. Makes you wonder how old Clinch was. It doesn't ever say, but I would guess about her age since they went to school together. It doesn't say. Well, she does say one place, doesn't she? So I guess he was about 3 years older than her. So maybe he was 28 or 29. Anyway, I love that part. I especially loved at the beginning. I mean, I think it's comical, that part of how she thought she was an old maid. It's not that I love that she was in misery or anything. But I like at the beginning when she says that she's finished her chores and she's going to go out and do what she does, in the evenings, walk about. But it says for the lift of the heart, she likes to look at cloud piles, sunsets, and mountaintops. I really love that, mountaintops and, of course, the cloud piles. She had already figured out, Levesey was a smart girl, she'd figured out, well, when you feel low, it's wonderful to go outside and walk about and look at the woods and look at the sky and see what's going on. She'd found that was a true balm for her sadness. I like, too, that in that little part between when she sees him and they're talking back and forth, that she says he was harder to find than a bee on a cold day. That is very descriptive. That was probably my favorite part of this story between Levesey and Clinch is the descriptive language all through this one. I wrote down so many different things. Smitch or smidge, he says you had no call. Then she's telling him that, says something about if he was Smitch or Smidge, you know, he'd be paying attention. He'd know it was a bird, not a frog. But then he tells her you had no call to do that turn. So in other words, he's just saying you're hateful to me and you don't have no reason to be. But I love that turn, no call, to use that turn on me. And then she says you've lit your last shuck. So you still hear people here, more in a joking, comical way, but to say I'm going to light a shuck for home, or even light a rag, got to light a rag and get out of here. Of course, they're not really lighting a torch like they did in those days to see their way home. They're just going out and getting their car and leaving. Like I said, most of the time said in a very jovial, joking manner. I liked the part where she says that she'd actually liked Clinch until he put the mud puppy down her shirt. She didn't like him much after that. But how that she had done those little charms, you know, when you're young girls. I don't know if you were like that. The one that comes to mind, of course, is having a daisy and picking off the flowers. He loves me not. And there's a lot of other ones. But the interesting ones for her were that she took her hair and put it between her fingers somehow and then pulled it off curly. I've never ever heard of that one. That's really interesting. And then the stick, that she stuck a stick in the ground and it leafed out. That one reminds me of all the folklore about Christmas, that on Christmas night things leaf out like that. So those were interesting. And my goodness, didn't Clinch know about the frogs? He knew all about them. It makes me want to see every frog that he talked about. Now, we have frogs here. I'm sure you do at your house, too. In fact, this week, Katie got a little frog out of the basement. I'd seen him down there, but I didn't know what happened to him. Our basement's not finished. It's unfinished, so things like that get in sometimes. But he was a cute little bitty frog. And then I've seen little teeny ones when I've been out and about. I don't know the names of any of them or how to talk about them like Clinch did. But when I was growing up, there was a pond just below Granny and Pap's. It's gone now in the name of progress. It's been filled in and not there any longer. But there was lots of those big bullfrogs. So hearing those frogs at night was just part of the soundtrack of my life, I guess you would say. So I really like the picture of the big bullfrogs of them. Another frog, thinking about things you hear, is, and I'm sure probably in your area too, maybe in the spring of the year, if you're somewhere that has those distinct seasons like we do, you'll hear what we call spring peepers, and you'll hear them. A lot of times you'll hear them even, maybe you'll hear them, most of the time when I hear them, it's like I'm driving, and I drive over a bridge or something, and I hear them. And then after that, we may have 2 or 3 more hard freezes. But it's just that it was warm enough that day for them, and then you don't hear them again until the next, you know. But those are a herald of spring, I guess you would say. I liked at the end, too, how sweet the description of her hair when she was saying that it was pretty. She was talking about herself, saying she was kind of plain, but about how that she had nice hair. And then I liked that she was talking about both of them, saying snails and tendrils move slow too, but they get there eventually. So that was I love all the descriptive language in this one. And then I jotted down some of the words. Spraddles, we say spraddles, you're all spraddled out there, usually meaning like with your legs spread out and your arms maybe. And then he was the droppingest, hoflingingest, outlightingest, all those things and then I think skedaddlingest was another. That's just putting that EST, that is so common in the mountains of Appalachia, and it just means, well, why would you say it like that? It's just a way for us to really put emphasis. I mean, he was the singingest, or the axe flingingest, or the whatever it was she was saying about Clinch, or the fightingest. Just means it's just the ultimate, like putting that real emphasis. So I liked all of those. Of course, he said the frog had a yeller throat, put that ER. I say yella, I put the A instead of an ER, but you do hear yeller often. Flat out, that's another, just saying like completely, absolutely. And pure, he used the word pure like that too. That was that one jumped out at me. Or for pure, he said, he was talking about they had to get the frog. Spang too, that was one. I liked that one. I don't, of course, hear anyone say that, but that was one I really liked. And then kerchunk, he was talking about the frog jumping in, or they were talking about it. Pap would say, interesting, he's the only person I've heard say that, but thinking about a frog, or maybe somebody falling into the water, he would say kersplunge. It went kersplunge. And kerchunk or kersplunge especially just brings to mind the actual sound of the water, how it makes. If you've ever been, you know, where you're throwing a big rock in the water or somebody falls in the water. Goldy brown, that was another description that I liked. And then one of them that I wrote down, I know I never knew until I started doing videos how often I say it. And if you watch all my videos, you probably know already what the word is. I cannot believe how many times I say kindly in my video, kindly. It's kindly like this. You kind of kindly want to do it this way. You kind of, you know, I say that so much, kinda or kindly. And then, I mean, I just never knew until I watched my videos that I say that all the time. And the other day I was with Granny and I heard her say it, and I thought, well, that's where I get it. I come by it honest, but I do use it an awful lot, that word. So this was just another great chapter from this book, another great story from around the quilting circle there. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. And I hope that you'll leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you from it. And of course, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday. We've got to see who tells their story next.